All right, let's get started. Seeing that timer is an interesting little window into the delay of Twitch and YouTube, and I see that I thought that YouTube actually had quite a bit of delay, like 30 seconds delay, but looking at the timer, it looks like they're equal. Well, not equal, but they're like, within a second or two, which is cool. Anyway, I thought I would do another stream of Roll for Question, where people are welcome to ask me, a veteran dungeon master, questions, and I would be happy to answer. And I am going to, in the meantime, answer questions that I see asked often in various channels on the internet and in various rooms about how to be a DM. Because this game is a game of tradition. And one of those traditions is you have to figure it out for yourself. And that sucks. You can't just read the book and then expect to know everything. Some things you got to learn for yourself. One of those questions is, what monsters should I send against my party? Now that question usually comes in several flavors. Usually it's a question about, my party is level 3, what should they be fighting? Or my party is has been in this kind of a mood. What is a good monster for them to meet that mood? There's an answer in terms of, if you're a level 3 party, you should be fighting things that are equivalent in that level. There's a narrative answer. There's a making this an interesting fight kind of answer. And then there's probably the best answer for a new player when you ask that question. And I want to differentiate between when a new player asks that question, what's the best answer, versus when a veteran DM asks that question, what are they actually asking for? Because if a player is asking just for inspiration is easy to give. But inspiration is best given with a little seed. So if you're asking, what should my players be fighting? Hopefully you're giving a little bit more context to that question than what new players are usually giving, which is no context at all. Sometimes it's literally, that's the entire context. Like, I'm a noob DM. I have level 3 players. What should they be fighting? That's a big, there's a lot. It's a lot of options, and how do we narrow that down? First, I want to briefly dip into what that means narrative-wise. Picking your monsters has a huge impact on the narrative of your game. That goes without saying. So, generally, when I'm running a game, what I like to do is create what I call a palette, which is a little document, a small little a note card or a text file or whatever, where I write down generally what inspires me to run the game and what themes and what tone interest me. So, for example, if I were to be running a game, I might put in that palette Baron von Bad Guy the Vampire. That's one component on my palette. Another, I might put like immortality. I might put death on that palette. So those are the things that I can always go back to whenever I am needing inspiration, whenever I'm lost, whenever I'm not sure what I'm doing. And I can, at a minimum, just grab something from there. So, for example, I should say, like, that's a good palette. Like, it's small. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's there for you. So you really don't need to worry about, like, doing it right. So, for example, what I might do is, if I was lost and I didn't know what to send them against my players, I'd look at my palette. I've got a vampire. That's a very, very straightforward, like, direct. I could send a vampire against my players. I could send a vampire's minions against my players. What are a vampire's minions? There's a lot of options there. There's vampire spawn. obviously. There's a whole roster of undead. I could send mercenaries in the employ of the vampire. I could send other like mystical creatures that are aligned with vampires, or maybe not aligned with vampires, but are in some way tangent to them. That gives me pretty good inspiration. Immortality, that is a bit harder to work with, but there are certainly creatures that you say immortality and they spring to mind. The first that comes to me are like inevitables, especially inevitables that are concerned with punishing people who seek immortality. There's like liches. That's probably extreme. This may not be the best word, but there are certainly a few things that come to mind. And then there's death, and that one's a lot easier. You've got the entire undead roster. You've got ghosts. You've got specters, banshees. You've got trying to think what is something death aligned that's not undead. Like you could argue for creatures of the afterlife to be involved. So angels and devils and all of that are something you could draw inspiration from. The point is that you've got a palette. Make your palette for your game. You can use that palette no matter what you put on it. You can probably derive some inspiration if you need to. Now, I will say that if you're drawing from your palette, that's probably not you're probably not playing your A game in terms of design. That's like your minimum, if anything. You really want to be picking monsters that form more of they connect to the story in some way. So you don't want to just pick random things just because you think of them, just because they're on your palette. You want, preferably when you're making a game, you have an antagonist in mind, and you want to be connecting your challenges to that antagonist in some way whenever possible. There might be environmental situations going on, like there might be a chasm, and that chasm is full of undead. That's just established. So if the players are going anywhere near that area, undead are on the table. That's fine. There might be a force of nature at play. That force of nature, not the best wording for it. Like there might be a war going on. There might be like a prophecy. There's something that drives creatures to act against the party's interests. And when you create challenges, when you create combats, using those as the basis for the combats builds them up in the world. So every time you fight undead in the chasm of undead, that establishes it more and more as a place where, as an important piece of your world. Every time you encounter like deserters, or you encounter like a military, like a scouting party, that establishes the war in your game. It's building up your world. Every time you fight the Baron's minions, that establishes the Baron as a challenge for the players to overcome. And it makes it all the sweeter when they finally get there. That is kind of the recommended direction you take when you're picking monsters for your fights. Pick them according to your story, and make sure that whatever you pick is building your story, is establishing something in your story that's important. That is making it more present in the minds of the players. Any combat that's just, I don't know, some wolves happened, the players fight them and then the players forget about them. That's fine, but it's kind of a wasted opportunity narrative-wise. It is. It really doesn't take that much effort to tie that into the rest of your world. If you don't have a world planned, that's fine. Use this as an opportunity to inspire your world then. Randomly some wolves happened. Now it's time to think about, what's those wolves' story? What do they tie in? Maybe they have maybe they're like a forward presence of like a really, really dangerous forest that you haven't really thought of, but now is the time. Put it in the game. Players can go there later on. Give them a reason. Build your world that way. Let every combat be an opportunity for you to build the narrative of your game. Now, narrative is not the only reason to have a combat, obviously. More often than not, at least in my experience, combat is a mechanical challenge. A lot of new players give me the vibe that they're asking about combat because they want to challenge the players mechanically. The game expects you to put combats in front of your players. Why else would everyone have swords and spells that do damage and whatever monks do? I don't know. What's the point of all that if you don't have combats, right? Now, I will caution that if you're just running combats for the sake of combats, that's not good. That's not good at all. Even if this is a combat-focused campaign, even if that's the only thing your players enjoy, you still want to do better than just randomly throwing monsters in front of them. Even board games put a little bit of narrative polish on what's happening in the game, and you should at least do a little bit. Don't just be like, yeah, you're in the woods, some wolves happen. That's a combat that the players will forget about, and that's not good. That's a wasted opportunity for a good combat. Now, it goes without saying we have to talk about CR, the challenge rating, which is the game's mechanical mark for you to figure out what is the most appropriate thing for your players to fight. Now, that comes with a caveat. A lot of veteran DMs out there have strong opinions about challenge rating, including me. I don't think it's a very good system. I don't think it's possible for it to be a very good system because challenge rating is a mathematical formula that is, what's the word? It's someone's attempt at turning the average difficulty into a number. And the problem with doing that is that it makes several assumptions that you can't rely on. For example, your players are a certain level. That's a fair assumption. And your players are equivalent to other players of that same level. And that's not a fair assumption. Two parties at the same level might be playing at different difficulties. So, for example, if you're a new group, you've got a fighter, wizard, cleric, rogue. Wizard might not have the best spells possible, and that's okay. The fighter might just be using whatever the game gave him. No one has planned anything fancy, and they'll perform at a certain level. And then if you pick a second party, same classes, same level, but the wizard has picked only the most potent spells in the game. The cleric has only picked the best spells for them. And the fighter and the rogue have like a combo that they've planned together, and they are really, really cranking out the damage. Those two parties need different difficulties, and you can't really express that via the challenge rating number. You know, they're both like the system says they both need threes. They both should be fighting threes. It's not exactly what it says, but it's basically what it says. There's no real way to express that in a number. Now, it's not an unsolvable problem. If the designers of Dungeons and Dragons really wanted to, they could create a more nuanced difficulty metric. They could have added a lot more bells and whistles to it and levers, and you can input like, my party has 3 magic items and this one has like combo mechanics that pair with this other class, and they're really using haste, and they're using their reactions every round, and then the system would spit out like, all right, they need to fight 60 giants. Good luck. You know, the developers could do that. They haven't, and is it at some point it's a diminishing returns for the amount of effort that it takes to do that, and that is a decision that they have made, and I am not equipped to say whether or not it's the right decision. It probably is, honestly. You can only account for so much. The players are always going to outsmart you at some point. So the question is, at what point do you let it go? And anyway, so we've got a number. We've got challenge rating. That is your number, new players. Is it a good number? No. Is it better than nothing? Yeah, it is. If you are ever not sure of what you should be sending against your players, look at their average level and compare with the challenge rating of what you're sending against them. And you generally want it to be within the ballpark. So if the party is level 3, challenge rating 2 is okay. Maybe a challenge rating 4 if you are feeling really, really mean. Challenge rating 3 is good. And that's advice that you will find very quickly becomes obsolete as you learn the game and as the players learn the game. Those numbers they're not perfect. they're not perfect. I wouldn't even call them good, but that is what you use. Now, it goes a little deeper than that, because just throwing, if the party is level 3, just throwing CR3 creatures at them doesn't make a combat good, and it is not going to. You've got more work to do. Something that you really, really should contemplate is, what are the monsters doing? What is their goal? What is the party's goal? And that is something that condenses down into something called stakes. What happens if the party wins? And what happens if the party loses? And usually, if you don't specify, the default is the stakes are death. Whoever loses dies. And usually people go with the default. And that's fine, as long as you do that intentionally. What you want to make sure is whatever monsters you pick, the stakes are clear, and you what's the word? You bring them to the table. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. You need to make sure that your monsters are behaving in a way that is consistent with their goals. And the other thing to consider with your from a mechanics perspective is that you need the monsters to be something that's challenging, but not insurmountable. If they're fighting something that's insurmountable, it's not really a thing that the players are participating in. It's more something that they're watching. It's more of a cutscene. And if it's not challenging, it's kind of the same energy, where the players, they know they're going to win. It's not a question of are they going to win. It's a question of when is this cutscene going to finish so that we can continue on. It is not an easy thing to nail down. challenge is very, very ephemeral. It is very fleeting, and it is something that even veteran DMs have a hard time nailing down. So you should not be ashamed if you are just starting out and you have no idea what you're doing. It's not ashamed to be wrong. It's not ashamed to, don't feel ashamed to get it wrong. It's probably going to happen because it happens to me. I've been playing this game for decades. What is important to know is to have a plan for when it goes wrong, and just keep on carrying on, keep on trying, because you'll get there. You'll get there. Every combat that you get wrong, it's just a learning opportunity to get you to the combat that is right, and it's absolutely worth the effort. And I don't really think there's an easy way to bypass that effort needed. There's no I don't have a bucket of tips that I could give to say use bugbears at level 2, use dragons at level 6. If you do this, the game is fun, you'll have fun, blah blah. I don't have that. Don't just take what I just said as useful advice. Make some combats. Some of them will suck, some of them will be great. And the ones that'll be great are the ones you'll remember, and the ones that suck you'll forget. And that's a good the other thing when designing a combat that I would recommend for new players is to don't worry about it being fancy. Just make something plain to start with. Work your way up to the fancy. It is important to try and make combats that are what's the word? That they make the players need to think about how they approach them. So if you can make a combat that really throws a wrench into the traditional combat style of hit it with a stick, cast magic missile on it, rogue sneak attack, blah 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 blah, that's a good thing. If you can add there's a pit in the middle of this room, and the ledge around the pit is actually very small, and now you've got to focus about how you're going to move across this terrain. That's more interesting. If you can make a combat that's about multiple dimensions, and there's people on the upper floor, they're shooting down at you, and you need to get up there, and can you jump? Can you fly? Can you backflip up the walls if you're, I don't know. That's more interesting than just, here's some orcs on a flat, featureless terrain, have fun. But when you're starting out, just start with the orcs. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's still fun. Now, getting back to the original question, when a new player asks me, which monster should I be using? I don't really have a good answer. I orcs. That's not. You got to give a little bit more context. So what I like to recommend, and oftentimes new players don't have any more context to offer. So what I like to recommend is grab a pre-written adventure. There are free ones out there. I wonder if there's a free one here on D&D Beyond. I don't actually know, but there are definitely free ones on the DM's Guild. Just grab one. Take a look at the combats in there. Don't feel bad about just stealing combats, especially when you're a new player. Just, hey, that fight looks fun. That's my fight now. Go nuts. Absolutely. Pick something, whatever inspires you. Don't worry about the players. Pick something that you enjoy running, and that will carry through to what you're to the table. So if you see a monster and it's doesn't really make sense, but it's the right CR and you can kind of make it work in the narrative, and it sounds cool, go with that. Don't go with that. Yeah. idea I like is watch D&D roleplay videos that I enjoy, take notes on what does and doesn't work. That's a great way. Yeah, watch other people's games and learn from them. Or don't, not just learn from them, but like if you see a fun combat, don't hesitate to steal it. Use it. Make it yours. Change it up a little if you want. Use it as is. It's fine. Just pick something that you want. And be prepared to be wrong. That's probably what the core of the question is at. Someone is asking, what monster should I use? Because they're worried that they might be picking wrong, and they want someone who knows what they're talking about to step in. And like, there's no, that's just pick, just go for it. Just try it out, and have a plan for when things go wrong, because they will go wrong eventually. You'll send a fight that's too easy. I do that all the time. Send a fight that's too hard. I do that all the time too. What do you do in those cases? Well, for the easy fight, you just move on and try again. There's gonna be more fights in the future. For a hard fight, that gets into the topic of fudging. That gets into the topic of, oh, this creature had less hit points than you thought. Hastily change the hit points behind the screen. Or, oh, this creature had a really powerful attack. Oh, but that's only one-time use. Change it behind the screen. Those are tricks you learn over time, but have something in place. If a fight is too hard, you can also just pause the game, apologize to the players, say, I messed up. My bad. This is too hard. Take one unit, take a monster out of play, resume the game. Keep going. Keep the game going. That's not good, but it gets you through that combat, and they'll get it right the next combat, and your players will remember the good combats and forget the bad ones. So you just need to power through it. That is how I would answer that question. What monster should I send against a level 3 party? Whatever inspires you. Whatever fits the challenge rating math. Use that number. Whatever connects to your world, whatever makes your world feel more alive. And just pick something. If it's wrong, it's fine. We all make mistakes, and we're all learning. Yes. If you've got a question, feel free to ask it in the comments, or feel free to leave a chat. The next question that I've got, last time I did this, I said that I don't like experience points. And someone asked me, why don't you like experience points? Well, I'll tell you. Experience points is, I'll say this again from the last stream, a system that is designed to tell you when to level up the party. It is a number that you get experience points for doing a thing. You level up when that number reaches a certain point. It's way, way more structured than just going, you level up because I feel like it. All right, it's been 4 sessions. I guess you can level up. You killed the boss. You can level up. You know, it's more structured to have an experience point number. That's the theory. The thing that I don't like about experience points in Dungeons and Dragons is it encourages behaviors that give experience points, and those behaviors are not the behaviors I want to encourage in my game. So, by default, every creature has an experience point value, and the idea is that if you defeat them, you get that experience. So, every monster is a thing to defeat. I don't like that. A lot of things, like talking your way through a situation, or bypassing a trap, or finding somewhere new and rare and exciting, exploring the world, those kind of things, The book says you give, I don't know, you give experience points however much you feel like. Do whatever you want. I don't care. It's not helpful. It's not useful. If I have to do whatever I want, I might as well just throw experience away anyway. I want experience points to help me guide the players do what I want them to do, and I want the system to do that. If I have to do it as a DM, I might as well just wing it. Might as well just say you level up whenever I say you level up, which is what the majority of dungeon masters do. The milestone system, that's what it is the most popular way to run a game. That's not the only reason. The math in Dungeons & Dragons is dumb, just to say the least. Can I find how much experience? Where is the experience on this? There it is. So to level up, you need hundreds of experience, thousands of experience, tens of thousands of experience, hundreds of thousands of experience. Those numbers are big and annoying, and they're big for no reason. Like, why is the smallest unit of experience you can get 25 experience from a creature? Why isn't this loading? You defeat like a big troll. Let me go ahead and bring this up in a tab here, and then let me bring up the creature stat blocks here, just to establish. So to get to level 10, I need 64,000 experience. It's going to take a lot of math to get there, and that's annoying. Defeating an ape is 100 experience. Defeating a badger is 10 experience. A boar is 50. 200 for a bear. Cat is 10. Constrictor, yeah. And the numbers get bigger. Defeating an elephant is 1100. Those numbers could be 1, 2, 5. They could be a lot easier to work with. There's no reason for these numbers to be so big. The other reason that I don't like experience points, it is something that interrupts the game flow. What do I mean by that? Usually, you get experience when you do something. You did something, here's 300 experience points. Stop the game so that the player can write that down on their sheet. You killed like 10 things. Let me add up how much experience they get. 1100. And now the party gets 1100. You have to figure out the math of how much each individual player gets, and then they need to write that down, and that takes like a minute. That is interrupting the game in a way that it really doesn't need to. Now, some tables do this and they're fine, and that's fine. Some tables, what they do is the DM will track how much experience they're getting at the table, but they won't award it until the end of the session. And that is a solution. It is a lot of bookkeeping on the DM's end that is unnecessary, honestly. Really shouldn't need to be doing that work. Even if it doesn't interrupt the flow for the players, the DM still has to stop for a second to write down, okay. I don't like it. Now, it's a shame that these are problems because experience is supposed to be a useful tool. It's there for pacing, and it's a visible number to the players. So it's supposed to build excitement. You know, they can see the experience bar slowly fill up more and more. They can see themselves getting closer and closer to that level. It builds anticipation for what's coming soon. And that's a good thing. And in a perfect world, it would be encouraging your players to play the game that you want them to play. So if you want your players to role play a lot more, and you want them to explore, and you want them to solve traps, and if the game gave XP, discrete amounts of XP for doing those things, you would see players doing those things more and more and more and more. It doesn't do that. And that's why I don't like it. Another question that I see is commonly asked. How do I make my combats fun? What makes a combat fun? That's a deep question, and it's usually not something that you can just answer straight away. There's usually a reason combats aren't fun. It's not like combats aren't fun because you didn't use enough orcs. That's not usually the answer. The most common answer, I will say, I talked about stakes earlier, and how if you don't have stakes, if you don't define stakes, the default stakes for your combats are death. And what often happens is a lot of dungeon masters will run those stakes so often that they get numb and boring because they're the same thing over and 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 over again. And easy solution, just add new stakes. Try adding new stakes to your game. Instead of fighting to the death, what if the monsters are just trying to steal money from the players and then they leave, you know? The players are trying to stop that. That's a completely different situation than fighting to the death. What if the monsters are just hungry and they're just after your food? Same story, you know? Maybe they might not even be interested in eating the players. They might just be interested in stealing their food and then running away. Different stakes. That makes the game exciting again. What if the monsters are interested in completing some sort of objective, like they're trying to lock up a room, and the players need to stop them from doing that? Different stakes. Suddenly the game has new life in it. That helps. Now, it's not the only reason for a combat not to be fun. There's pacing, there's challenge, there's building combats in a way that have mechanical symphony with the players. So, for example, if your players have a lot of anti-magic abilities, like if someone has Mage Slayer, if the wizard has Counterspell, if the bard has Silence, the Silence spell, and if the rogue is just talking all the time about how I really want to stab some wizards, it's a good idea to, you know, put some magic in your combats for the players to use their abilities. That makes it, and don't just like throw them a bone. Just like, this wizard is here to die. Like, this wizard is to get stabbed by the Mage Slayer. Really, really develop the combat so that it becomes clear that the person who took Mage Slayer really saved the party a lot of stress, because without it, a lot of people would have gotten fireballed, or a lot of people would have gotten spirit guardianed, or I don't know. You know, if your players have strengths, sometimes play to them. There's an adage there's a quote that I've heard: shoot the monk. Sometimes you need to do that. That's an important factor. Challenge is a moving target, hard to get. You still got to try. If you're not trying, those combats are going to turn into cutscenes. That's just no good. Let me think. What else? I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. There's a lot of things that make combat fun for me. And I'm more of a dungeon master that enjoys the story being told by the combat. So it's important that the players are fighting something that either builds upon the main antagonist, the main big bad evil, the BBEG, or is sort of a remnant of the BBEG, such that, like, here's some zombies. They're in a crypt. You're fighting them. The zombies, you're expected to beat them, but you learn that they are there because the BBEG did a thing and they're a consequence of that thing. They're evidence. This is an element that you can use to turn combat into a story. That's what I find fun. And I know that I am not everybody. I know there are other people who find combat is a fun opportunity to try and challenge your players with, this guy has a special ability and now magic doesn't work in this cone. This guy has magic and now one of your party is now working against you. They've been charmed and now they're an enemy and you have to deal with that. This guy has an aura that makes everyone slow, or they make a wall and they cut off the party in half and now you've got 2 fights happening and good luck, deal with that. You know, that kind of stuff also important. That kind of stuff some people find fun, and that's important. Yeah. How much do I need? So another question. How much do I need to prep before my first session? And that's a good question because it's usually a question that is coming from the feeling that new players often need to prepare more than they actually do. They think they need to prepare more than they actually do because new players don't have a lot of confidence in what they've planned. And they've maybe watched other people run games. They've watched other DMs. And watching those DMs, they are very confident. They know what they're talking about. Any question the players ask, the DM has like 5 things. And it looks like they're like, what do they got behind the screen? They have an encyclopedia of the game. Like, geez, these DMs are so prepared. Meanwhile, I've got nothing. I'm a new player. I have nothing prepared. What right do I have to even run a game? No. You're probably over-preparing if you're a new player. So, what do you need? You only need enough prep to get you through the first session, honestly. And that is less than you think. It is tradition for a new player, for any player, honestly, to prep more than they need. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with prepping too much. Keep prepping. Prep until you want to stop. But you don't need that much. You can probably get away with there's something called the 5-room dungeon, which is a dungeon that has 5 rooms, and that's it. You can probably just prep that, and that's probably too much. You don't need to prep the world. You don't need to prep the entire campaign. You don't need to prep 200 NPCs. You don't need to prep 50 combats. You don't need to prep the life story of a PC. You don't need to do any of that. Don't do it unless you feel really inspired to do it. Don't feel obligated to do it. That's what I should say. You can get away with running a game with just a 5-room dungeon, and that's it. You probably don't even need the 5-room dungeon. You could probably, you probably only need half of that. Maybe. And that is not a helpful answer, but it's a true answer. Whatever you've got prepped, you're probably relax. Be confident in what you've got. You don't need more. When I prep, I usually prep about 2 pages, less than 1,000 words. That's for everything. That's for the premise of the campaign. That's for, here are all of my NPCs. Here are all of my locations that that are major locations. Here's story beats. Here's what I expect to happen. Less than 1,000 words. You don't need to draw a map out. You don't need to have any material. I mean, it's nice to have that stuff. If you want to have that stuff, absolutely. Go for it. But don't feel obligated. Don't feel like, I don't have a battle map. I can't possibly run a game. Just draw it in the session. Draw it on a piece of paper. You don't need it. I don't have What if my players want to go to a neighboring town? Don't worry. You don't need to prep that. What if my players want to fight literally everything everywhere all at once? Don't worry. Don't worry. You don't need to prep for everything. Just prep the basics. Prep 5 rooms of a dungeon. Or prep a 5-room dungeon. And you're good. Yeah, every time I've run a game, I've planned it out, and what happens is the prep that I wrote for the first session lasts about 8 sessions, and I don't need to prep more. I'll write like an additional paragraph, I'll write like an additional 100 words, and I'll add to that over time, but you don't need that much. You find that what you've written goes a lot further than you expected it to. And the players are a lot slower than you expected them to. And also, the players are going to throw you curveballs no matter what you prep. There's no amount of prep you can do to prep for some of the shenanigans that your players are going to want to try. And there's no point in delaying the game just because that's a fact. You can't do anything about it. You're going to have players that are going to want to try and befriend the bad guy. You're going to have players that are going to want to try conquering the inn, overthrowing the innkeeper and taking it for themselves. You're going to have players that try I don't know. It's hard to predict players. If I could predict players, I wouldn't get so flat-footed. I'm trying to think. What's the last crazy thing that happened? A common thing that happens is people try and use money to bribe their way past challenges. And it's really hard to say no to that because characters have a lot of money. 50 gold goes a long way. You can't prep for it. You can't prep for everything. Don't try. Just 1,000 words. Prep 1,000 words. Go. Be prepared to improvise for the crazy stuff. And then the for the regular stuff, you got it. You got it. It might be a rough game, but you're a new player. You get an allowance as a new player to make mistakes, and you're learning the game. And if your players are learning the game too, they won't even notice. They'll be busy. They'll be too busy looking at their character sheets. That's what I had to say on that. If you've got a question about running Dungeons and Dragons as a dungeon master, feel free to ask in the chat, in the comments. Absolutely. It's all good. Happy to answer. What's another question? I don't have any more questions prepared, so I have exhausted my prep, which is not the same thing that happens to dungeon masters in a game. A stream is not a game. Me running out of prep is not an example of how much prep you need to do as a dungeon master. Because you've got players, and the players are going to be jamming content into your game like crazy. That's going to happen. And you kind of underestimate what players are going to do once you get started. You start reading out the basic text to your dungeon. Players are going to want to interrupt and start asking questions and start doing things before you're ready. And take that as a compliment. Players that want to do stuff are interested in your game. Players that are just sitting back and letting you read and do all of this stuff, that's not a good sign for your game. You don't want passive players. You don't want players that are just there. You want your players to be adding content to your game. You want them to be taking actions. You want them to be interrupting you for their own mischief. Now, there's a limit, of course, but, Some is better than none. Well, I've thought of a question. I have not had anyone ask me this in a long time, but it is something that I've seen asked before. How do I get my players to roleplay more? It's a good question. This is a question about getting your players to participate. And there are things you can do to encourage. Now, you can't, if a player doesn't want to participate, you can't make them participate. You can't be like, I'll give you pizza if you participate, or I'll give you cool magic items if you roleplay. That's not great. I mean, you can do it, but it's not what I would recommend. What you want to do is, and this is what I would say to any dungeon master that asks me that. Set the example. That's how you do it. So, if you want your players to roleplay, you roleplay to them first. Roleplay at them. Refer to them in character. Ask them in character what you want. Don't refer to their player name. Ask them, put them on the spot. Ask them, what do you do? Encourage them to answer in character by you responding in character whenever possible. That is something that you probably will be doing by yourself for a while. It takes time for players to get comfortable, and that's just, you can't work around that. But if you keep it up, I promise you, players will get more comfortable with you. They'll open up. They'll start role-playing more. Or if they don't want to roleplay, then no, they won't do that. And there's no, you can't make people who don't want to roleplay. But give people a chance. Don't just assume that they don't want to roleplay. Especially if it's a new group, and especially if it's people who have never played D&D before, or any role-playing game before, and especially if it's a group that doesn't know each other. There's absolutely going to be a moment where people are still trying to get comfortable with themselves, still trying to get comfortable with the game, still trying to get comfortable with the group. Give people space. Don't expect voice actors level of role playing on the first session. Let me look at the rules here for a second. Is there something that inspires a question? I don't know. Weapons, races, classes, instructions about playing the games. Something that no one has asked me, but something I'm just gonna start talking about is when I'm teaching new players, I try and do it in about a 15-minute chunk. So what I like to do is, before the game starts, introduce them to the idea of the D20, the 20-sided die, which I have right here. Probably don't need to see it, but this is a 20-sided die. Just in case players don't know. Game is played by rolling that die, adding your proficiency bonus to it, maybe, if you're proficient, and adding an attribute. Then that leads into, what are the attributes? How do you get them? You start the game with them. You have to pick where they go. Each attribute is useful in a certain way. If you describe the attributes, I find that that's usually good enough. People understand what strength is. You don't have to tell them when you would use strength. People understand what intelligence is. You don't have to tell them when you would use intelligence. Intelligence, wisdom is a bit murky. It's not a great distinction, but other than that, the rest of these, yeah. You've introduced proficiency, so you can just say saving throws are a thing. You're proficient with 2 of them. Done. Taught. Talk about difficulty tests. You roll a d20. You add proficiency bonus, you add your attribute, and you're trying to roll above a target number. A difficulty check, and that check is usually that's something that the DM provides, so you don't have to worry about it. And then at that point, oh no, one more thing. Weapons, blah blah blah. Weapons do damage. Damage is a number that you roll. It's a dice that you roll based on your weapon, and that's subtracted from hit points. Yeah. Introduce the idea of hit points. Introduce the idea of weapons. Introduce the basics of spellcasting, and then that's it. Once you've explained those things, and you can, if you really master the whole explanation, you can probably get it done in 15 minutes. Everything past that, the players can figure out, especially if you're starting at level 1, because there's really not much else going on that they need to know off the top. There are feats now. I have not played 2024 D&D yet, so I've not had to explain feats. That's going to be not super fun, but here's feats. Pick an origin feat. Here they are. Here's a list. Shouldn't be too complicated. Your class gives you starting gear, so you don't need to talk about that. Talking about conditions, you don't need to talk about that at the beginning. Damage and healing is a part of talking about hit points. You really don't need to bog down the players in their first session. Just teach them the basics. As you play, as opportunities arise to explain new rules, go ahead and explain them there. And then that gets new players playing the game, thinking about their characters. Maybe they start role-playing sooner rather than later. That's really the goal. Don't overload your players. Let them look at their character sheets and work with what they know, and start to play the game. All right. I like your D&D advice. Good stuff. Made me look for the like button. Can't find it. Well, thank you. If you've got a question about how to run a game, if you're a new DM, feel free to ask. Happy to help. A question that I don't have a good answer to, and no one has asked me, but a question that I would like to ask other people out there. When you've got new players, and you're not a new DM, but you've got new players, and they need to pick spells, I don't believe that